A NASA astronaut carried a space radiation detector into the thin, dangerous air of Everest, chasing numbers most people never see. Not a summit selfie, not a record, data. He believed those readings could protect future crews far from Earth. The mountain didn't care. The plan was precise. The environment was brutal, breath shortened, pressure dropped. Every step turned into a negotiation with the body. He kept going, not for glory, but for answers. And then, almost as soon as the push began, the climb twisted into something else. What drove Karl Henize to risk space-grade tech on the world's most unforgiving slope? And why did that decision ignite controversy that still lingers today? We start at the beginning. Before Everest, Karl Henize had already tested himself where most never go: orbit. He wasn't a daredevil. He was an astronomer who turned data into discovery. NASA picked him as a scientist astronaut, and he spent years supporting Apollo and Skylab before finally flying as a mission specialist on Spacelab 2 in 1985. In space, his job was simple on paper and hard in practice: make complex instruments behave, keep experiments running, and bring back clean results. He logged hundreds of hours in orbit, focused on ultraviolet astronomy and instrument operations, earning a reputation for calm problem-solving under pressure. Off the clock, he wasn't a couch academic. He trained, he hiked, and he climbed. By the early 90s, he'd taken on serious peaks, including Mount Rainier, building the cardiovascular base and discipline that long expeditions demand. To him, mountains weren't a stunt. They were another place to collect meaningful measurements and learn how humans perform under stress. That mindset explains why Everest entered the picture. Karl wasn't chasing headlines. He was building a plan: carry a space-grade radiation detector to extreme altitude and see what the readings looked like in the real world. If the data helped future crews spend months in deep space with better risk models, the climb had a purpose. The question was never whether he could take hardship. It was whether the science justified the risk, and that leads straight to the device he chose to haul into the Himalaya. Karl's backpack didn't just hold food in layers. It carried a tissue-equivalent proportional counter, a TEPC, the kind of detector NASA trusts when the question is, how much radiation does a human-like body actually absorb? Think of it as a smart chamber filled with material that mimics soft tissue. When high-energy particles pass through, the instrument logs how much energy lands where it matters. Not just counts, quality of dose. That's crucial for long missions. Why Everest? At extreme altitude, the air is thin, so more cosmic radiation reaches you than it does at sea level. Everest becomes a natural testbed without building a lab. If the TEPC could capture dose patterns at multiple heights, roughly base camp, intermediate camp, and above, those curves might sharpen risk models for crews spending months in orbit or beyond. Pilots, astronauts, even high-altitude researchers benefit from those numbers. Karl wanted real-world data, not just simulations. The unit wasn't tiny. It added weight. It needed power. It needed handling like any precision instrument. But Karl had run complex hardware in space. Carrying one up, a glacier was just a different checklist. He planned controlled stops at set elevations, quick runs, and careful notes. Clean methods in a dirty environment. The bigger worry wasn't the electronics. It was the human body. Go too high, too fast, and fluid can build in the lungs. That condition, high-altitude pulmonary edema, can turn breathing into a crisis. It's rare with good acclimatization and conservative pacing, but it's the danger that ultimately ended Karl's life on October 5th, 1993. The plan accounted for it: gradual ascent, watch for symptoms, descend at the first sign of trouble, supplemental oxygen on hand. The science was careful. The mountain is not. So the goal was simple: carry a space-grade dosimeter into thin air, collect clean reads, get out. The next step was building a team, a route, and a schedule that could protect the data and the people long enough to finish. But that wasn't the whole story. This wasn't a tourist team. Karl joined a small British-led research expedition on Everest's north side, the colder, windier approach through Tibet. No fixed ropes from a commercial army, no big media caravan. It was a privately backed, science-first push with a simple plan: reach key altitudes, power up the detector, log readings, move down safe. The schedule was tight, early October 1993, when storms and deep cold start closing the post-monsoon window. That choice raised the difficulty before anyone clipped in. The route mattered. The North Approach strings together base camp, interim camp, and advanced base camp at about 21,000 feet, exactly the range Karl needed for stage measurements. Fewer crowds meant fewer delays for the instrument runs, but also fewer support options if something went wrong. Everyone understood the medical red line. If high-altitude pulmonary edema showed up, heavy breath, cough, fluid in the lungs, the only fix was rapid descent and oxygen. That risk was written into the plan because it had to be. It would also be the cause recorded on October 5, 1993, when the climb unraveled. Gear weight stayed lean. The TEPC, power packs, and essentials were divided to keep each carry manageable. The idea was to tag the test points quickly: stop, stabilize, record, move. Karl's background with finicky hardware meant confidence in the procedure. The unknown was how his body would react to the altitude and pace under early season weather. They stepped out from base camp with a clear checklist and a narrow weather window. The first day would answer a blunt question: could the team gain height fast enough to hit the planned test stops without triggering the very condition they feared? The mountain delivered the answer faster than anyone expected, and not in their favor. They moved fast toward advanced base camp, and the first warning didn't come from the instrument. It came from Karl's breathing. Short sentences, longer pauses, a cough that didn't match the pace. Within hours, the team shifted from data mode to safety mode. Accounts differ on the exact spot. Some place him near 21,000 feet, others a bit higher, but all agree on what mattered: his lungs were failing. This was high-altitude pulmonary edema. Fluid in the lungs, oxygen drops, movement gets harder by the minute. The checklist kicked in: stop, attempt descent, put him on supplemental oxygen, strip weight from his pack. The goal was simple: lose altitude fast. Even with oxygen, his condition worsened. Breathing turned labored at rest, speech shortened. The team kept trying to lower him, but the window was closing. On October 5, 1993, Karl died of high-altitude pulmonary edema during the climb. Later reports disagree on details, the precise altitude, whether it was halfway through day one or later, but not on the cause. It wasn't a fall, it wasn't a storm, it was HAPE. The very risk they had planned around became the final word. What followed was the hardest call any expedition can face. Retrieval on that terrain is dangerous and slow. Weather was sliding the season shut. The team had to decide how to honor him, protect the living, and end the mission with care. And that decision led to a choice that still sparks debate today. After Karl died of high-altitude pulmonary edema, the team stopped being a research party and became a recovery group. The north side is remote. Helicopter options were limited. Weather was closing. Moving a body over broken ice and steep moraine would have risked more lives. The decision was made on the ground, with the people exposed to that risk. Bury him near base camp on the north side and end the expedition. That choice still divides audiences. Some argue every effort should be made to bring climbers home. Others point out the reality. Retrieval above 20,000 feet can take dozens of people, days of exposure, and a window the mountain rarely gives. On Everest, many who die remain where they fell. A few are moved lower when conditions allow. In Karl's case, the burial at lower elevation was a compromise between respect, safety, and what was physically possible in that moment. Families don't make these calls in a vacuum. Cost, weather, permits, and the risk to rescuers all factor in. The north side adds extra layers of logistics and governance. In 1993, those hurdles were higher than they are today. The team concluded there was no safe, immediate way to carry him out. They preserved his gear, closed out what they could, and made the long exit down the Tibetan Plateau with the expedition effectively over. Science didn't get its full data set. The instrument had been tested, but the sequence of altitude readings Karl wanted was cut short. What remained was a harder question. Was the plan, using Everest as a high-altitude lab, worth the risk that ultimately claimed his life? And that's where the debate sharpens. Did the data justify the danger that ended with high-altitude pulmonary edema and Karl's death? Everest offered real benefits. Thin air means higher cosmic radiation at ground level. The TEPC could log dose patterns across sharp altitude jumps, outside a lab, in brutal cold and low pressure, conditions that stress both hardware and humans. Field work like that reveals failures you won't find on a bench. There were alternatives. Aircraft flights can profile radiation at cruising altitudes with less risk. Balloons can climb even higher. Spacecraft carry dosimeters all the time. But those options have trade-offs: limited flight windows, higher program costs, or environments that are excellent for space data but don't test instrument handling by small field teams on Earth. In 1993, before the space station era, a lean expedition looked like a direct way to validate methods and gather comparative reads fast. Critics point to the basics: 66 years old, an early October push, the North Side's harsher logistics. If the goal was a cleaner dose curve, why not pick a safer platform and remove the human variable that ultimately proved fatal: high-altitude pulmonary edema? Supporters counter that Karl knew the risk, built safeguards, and was trying to answer a real question with a proven tool in a real environment. Both things can be true. The scientific aim was sound, and the operational choice carried a risk that turned decisive. What's left is a lesson about method selection. The right question can meet the wrong field plan, or a solid plan can meet the wrong day. Karl believed the instrument's readings could help protect people in space. The climb didn't fail because the science was weak. It failed because the mountain punished the margin for error. And yet his career wasn't defined by that single outcome. That's where his legacy comes into focus next. Karl wasn't a thrill seeker. He was a disciplined astronomer who turned instruments into insight. His work lives on in ultraviolet catalogs and missions that valued quiet competence. He carried a TEPC toward Advanced Base Camp for data that could protect future crews, and on October 5, 1993, high-altitude pulmonary edema ended the climb. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing safety. The lesson is blunt. Ask big questions, but build safety margins that don't collapse when the body does. Karl built guardrails. They weren't enough. The research aim moved on to aircraft studies, station monitors, and better models that guide missions today. Everest isn't a lab unless you return. Space isn't survivable without hard numbers. Karl pushed for those numbers and paid the price. Was it worth it? That judgment is yours, but his standard stands. Measure precisely, plan conservatively, and never mistake courage for safety.